Donald Trump is a very nice person, and I am a very nice person. And I'm a very good Christian, because the Pope said something to the effect that maybe Donald Trump isn't Christian, okay? And he's questioning my faith. I was very surprised to see it, but I am a Christian. I'm proud of it. Okay, for a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful. I'm proud to be a Christian, and as president, I will not allow Christianity to be consistently attacked and weakened, unlike what is happening now with our current president. Okay? Believe me. No leader, very important, and this has just been given out to the press 2 seconds ago, no leader, especially a religious leader, should have the right to question another man's religion or faith, especially when they feed all sorts of false information into him. They're using the Pope as a pawn, and they should be ashamed of themselves. That's the Mexican government. They should be ashamed of themselves for doing so, especially when so many lives are involved and when illegal immigration is so rampant and so dangerous and so bad for the United States. Okay? Period. That's it.
Just let me stop by saying we see President Trump there wearing a skull cap, a kippah, in fact, as it's known in Hebrew, being taken to the Western Wall by the ultra-Orthodox rabbi in charge of the location. Clearly he's been asked to look at text as such, explaining the importance of the wall. What is also very interesting for viewers is the fact that he is actually standing with his wife, because men and women are actually separated in front of the wall, and clearly we can see that they're not right in front of the wall, they're quite a few metres back in a general common area, and as I was saying earlier, this is an area almost crammed full to its brim with both tourists and Jewish pilgrims. And Doug Herbert, our international affairs commentator, as we were saying earlier, this is a very controversial side trip to make. In fact, his administration got into a bit of hot water in the last few weeks because they talked about the Western Wall actually not being present in Israel, something which, of course, the Israelis...
Exactly. I mean, the geographic, everything, basically, you could wade into giant controversies just depending on where you're physically standing in Jerusalem. In this case, in the Old City, I mean, this cuts really to the core of a lot of those outstanding problems. If they ever, manage to get, and Donald Trump says it's his express purpose to try to get both the parties back to the negotiating table, right? We've basically had the Israeli-Palestinian peace process completely dead in the water, completely stalled. They totally collapsed in 1914. There's been no real direct.
And this year we're doing even better than last year. So by working together, we can be much more effective, and that is the commitment we just made or ratified this afternoon.
And that was a long and very diplomatic answer to your question. I will say it a little bit shorter. Walls work. Just ask Israel. They work. Believe me, they work. And we have no choice. Peter Baker? And you know why they're going to pay? And I have great relationships with Mexico and phenomenal relationships with the Mexican people. Phenomenal. And they buy apartments from me. They work for me by the thousands. Phenomenal relationships. But let me just tell you, we lose so much money with Mexico in terms of trade imbalance, $45 billion last year. Plus, we give Mexico billions and billions of dollars. They will pay for the wall, and it'll be very interesting. And you know what? People are going to come into this country, but they're going to come in legally, Sarah. A lot of the European countries are going to build walls to stop the immigration. Well, walls work. All you have to do is ask Israel. Walls work if it's properly constructed. Not the walls that these characters, these politicians that we have running our country, who are a disgrace, all talk, no action politicians. They build a wall this big, they drive cars right through it. Walls work. All you have to do is go and see Israel. They will tell you that walls work. It's getting designed right now. A lot of people say, oh, Trump was only kidding with the wall. I wasn't kidding. I don't kid. I watch this and they say I was kidding. No, I don't kid. I don't kid about things like that, I can tell you. No, we will have a wall. It will be a great wall, and it will will be a big help. Just ask Israel about walls. Do walls work? Just ask Israel. They work.
Keep up.
Just so you understand, I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had to know the story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
How's the visit so far, Mr. President?
With open eyes and very fresh thinking. We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past. Old challenges demand new approaches. My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital. This act passed Congress by an overwhelming bipartisan majority, but they made their best judgment based on facts as they understood them at the time. Nevertheless, the record is in. After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
To declare Israel's permanent ownership of the disputed Golan Heights is provoking international condemnation. The president upended more than 5 decades of U.S. policy with his call on Twitter yesterday, saying it was time. Israel seized that territory from Syria in the '67 war. So how's the president's announcement being received?
Well, with that condemnation from the international community, but it is so popular in Israel, where his friend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is really fighting for survival in an election that's going to be held just 18 days from now. Netanyahu has really sought to capitalize on his close relationship with the president.
They carry out an incredible way of life in the face of great terror. The United States recognizes Israel's absolute right to defend itself. The despicable attack this morning demonstrates the significant security challenges that Israel faces every single day. And today I am taking historic action to promote Israel's ability to defend itself and really to have a very powerful, very strong national security, which they're entitled to have. In a moment, I will sign a presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereign right over the Golan Heights. The state of Israel took control of the Golan Heights in 1967 to safeguard its security from external threats. Today, aggressive action by Iran and terrorist groups in southern Syria, including Hezbollah, continue to make the Golan Heights a potential launching ground for attacks. All day, all night, they want to find out, did Trump make a mistake?
Now, Trump is saying he watched from his Manhattan apartment as people jumped from the Twin Towers on 9/11.
I have a window in my apartment that specifically was aimed at the because of the beauty of the whole downtown Manhattan. And I watched as people jumped, and I watched the second plane come in.
While jumping from the towers that day, Trump's apartment in Midtown is roughly 4 miles from where the World Trade Center's towers stood.
Many people jumped, and I witnessed it. I watched that.
Large crowds in New Jersey celebrating the day of the 9/11 attacks. pointing to a line in a Washington Post story published a week later that said law enforcement had detained people allegedly seen cheering on rooftops in Jersey City.
Holding tailgate style. Tailgate. What that means? Tailgate. That means football games, Ohio State, thousands of people in parking lots, on roofs.
While government officials and even the reporter who wrote that story
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units.
A private communications company for whom a half dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked. American investigators fear information generated by this firm may have fallen into the wrong hands and had the effect of impeding the September 11th terror inquiry. Here is Carl Cameron's second report.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
What city and state, please?
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide.
Israeli-based company called Amdocs that generates the computerized records and billing data for nearly every phone call made in America. As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comprimising, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comprimising are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. This process was authorized by the 1994 Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA. Senior government officials have now told Fox News that while CALEA made wiretapping easier, it has led to a system that is seriously vulnerable to compromise and may have undermined the whole wiretapping system. Indeed, Fox News has learned that Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller were both warned October 18th in a hand-delivered letter from 15 local, state, and federal law enforcement officials who complained that, quote, law enforcement's current electronic surveillance capabilities are less effective today than they were at the time CALEA was enacted. Converse insists the equipment it installs is secure, but the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide. The actual equipment has ever been thoroughly tested for leaks. A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many unauthorized, non-law enforcement personnel can access the wiretap system. And the FBI's own nondescript office in Chantilly, Virginia, that actually oversees the CALEA wiretapping program, is among the most agitated about the threat. But there is a bitter turf war internally at FBI. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia, that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years, they've thrown business to Converse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Converse government contracts over the years now work for the company. What knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
No, there's not, but there are growing instincts and an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that and have begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation to take precisely that possibility. Brett?
All right.
On that plane, it's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street.
So, urban moving systems was discovered in a white van that had checked positive for carrying explosives.
I could see the towers from my window, and this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked, and I see 3 guys on top of the van, and I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked.
There was a group of Israelis, some of whom later were revealed as Mossad assets, who were arrested after cheering and high-fiving and videotaping the crash of the airplanes into the World Trade Tower.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, and enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the two suspects, and they're questioning them as we speak.
Reports we're getting now, 2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I'm getting from two sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van. That is right now all I'm hearing, but again, 2 to 3 people in custody, and we are trying to get more information on that right now.
Deborah, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Do you know where on the Jersey Turnpike? How far from New York City?
We do not know that. We are looking into that. There is one report that it was the New Jersey Turnpike. There is another report that it was
On that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, 10-4. I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for with Kate. The 4? You caught that last message? That's fine. With a mural painted, airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's good. You got those? Are you holding those 2 guys, Kate? Under, let's get some people in there. Listen to that. Get out of them. All right, get in. All right, listen, you didn't get any further on those 2 guys over there. You all right over there, Kate? We have both suspects under, Kay. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under, Kay. Let's get some help over here. Now, I'm sending you here to shoot there. I just want to make sure you and your guys are all right over there, Kay. That's all. What's the location of that, Kay? Put them up. You know, we have both Hilltrans that exploded. Resurrect? What location? The location, Kay. So read that up to the 10-4 system. What is that location? King Street between 6th and 7th. King Street, that's 6th and 7th Avenue. King Street, 6th and 7th Avenue. Which unit is on the scene on King 6 or 7? Which unit are you, Kate? Captain Calamuso on these. There's a vector evacuate. What's that? Explosion. Which unit is on the scene on King Street, Kate? Avenue with a possible bomb in the van. 10-4-135.
I told you, did you hear that they have they caught a bus? Or a buck or a truck?
a van full of bombs, right?
Oh no, somebody said there was a truck. They had a picture of the World Trade Center with a plane flying into it. They caught it.
By now, I think it should be abundantly clear that Urban Moving Systems was in fact a Mossad front company. It was run by a known Mossad operative named...
It's really an amazing thing. Most of New York City's rescue operations and their police and fire departments have been concentrating their actions down in Lower Manhattan, where the two planes hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. But some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. Now, I'm told that those explosives could have been enough to blow up the entire span and all the cars and the people that were on it. But nevertheless, they were arrested. I'm told they were arrested Houses were destined for underneath the George Washington Bridge. Again, a tragedy has been averted. The George Washington Bridge still stands because of some aggressive police work on the part of New York City and Port Authority police officers. As you know, when New York City goes into a full security alert, the first thing that they do is that they look at the bridges and tunnels going into New York City because they are regarded as major potential targets. They look at the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, and the George Washington Bridge, and also to a lesser extent the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel and the Midtown Tunnel. And they're looking at those tunnels and they're trying to prevent anybody that looks suspicious from going across. Apparently what happened in this case is that you had two people in a truck who looked suspicious. Police gave chase. They stopped the truck. They found an entire truck full of explosives.
Law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van. That is right now all I'm hearing.
And, hollered over my lieutenant. I think that could be the man. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.